Hey guys, how's it going? So today we are going to be talking about CM Punk, otherwise known as Philip Jack Brooks in real life, ex-professional wrestler, and I believe he was a writer for Marvel, if I'm not correct. And more previously known, he is going to be in the UFC as a fighter. However, it seems that CM Punk or Philip Brooks is going to have to wait a while since it has been reported he's going to have a back surgery before his upcoming fight, and I believe he's going to have his fight with Mickey Gall, who won a rap like a sweepstakes kind of thing. Like I think there was like a competition or like some type of preliminary thing to decide who would fight Philip Brooks. But I said from the second CM Punk announced that he was going to UFC, this had terrible idea written all over it. It's a genius idea for UFC because you're going to be drawing in a hell of a lot of money from not only the UFC people who probably want to see this ex wrestler in the quote unquote fake world of wrestling get knocked out by a quote unquote real fighter from the UFC. And then you're going to have the other audience who are just going to want to see what can this ex wrestler do. Could he possibly follow what Brock Lesnar did, or what's the other one? The other guy that's in TNA, his name escapes me right now. Bobby Lashley, yes. To see if he could follow Bobby Lashley or Brock Lesnar and how they've had successful MMA and UFC careers. Then you're going to have the wrestling community coming in to see how their former wrestling, one of their wrestling gods basically will stand in the UFC. But to me, I just said from the beginning, I'm not trying to hate on the guy or anything. I don't wish any bad on the guy. The guy, he's going on with his life. He was wronged by WWE. He's trying to move on with his life. He's found a new passion. That's all good and all, and I have nothing against that. But, I mean, when you are a person, I mean, CM Punk is 37 years old, and he has a body probably of a 50-year-old, probably, no exaggeration, after a whole lot of injuries from wrestling. He has a beaten down body from wrestling. He has a shit ton of previous injuries. He has a shit ton of surgery history. I mean, the guy is fucking broken down. He's not a young, fresh guy who, has his whole career ahead of him. This is a guy who has done wrestling essentially his whole life, and really kind of at the really end of it, when you're considering, a sport as a career, really at the latter end of his life is trying to get in the UFC, and he's already fucking up. He's already having to delay his first match because he has to have a back surgery. And I know April Jeanette, who is also known as AJ Lee, who was in WWE as well, known as AJ Lee, my favorite diva of all time, or wrestler. Digress, either way. She did not like the idea that CM Punk was wanting to go to UFC, and if I was AJ Lee, I would have done everything in my power to talk him out of this, because she is married to him, and that is her husband, and when you're married, you really do care about the person you're married to, and she knows, just like a lot of people in the UFC and people in general know, that when you go into the UFC, it's a lot different than wrestling. It's a lot different than really a lot of other sports as well. It's very physical. It's very dangerous. I mean, look at Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar's a guy who's far more intimidating, far more stronger, far more skilled. He's had several hellacious injuries in UFC. Some took him out for a good bit, which in a way kind of resulted in him semi-retiring from UFC. So someone who is extremely bigger, stronger, and I wouldn't say a better athlete, but at least in fighting standards, a better fighting athlete. He came out with very serious injuries, some of which are still with him today. He has stitches and scars and bruises. I mean, even Brock Lesnar, who he had a successful UFC career, but I mean, he's still carrying the scars of his UFC days to this day as we speak. So, I don't know. I never thought that he should have ever went to UFC. Like, if he had wanted to go to UFC, he should have done it when he was not. He should have done it years before now. He should have made up his mind, and regardless of whatever his position was in WWE, decided, you know what, I want to be a UFC fighter. I gotta jump ship quick, and that never happened. And unfortunately, it took a shit ton of legal issues and wronging on WWE's part to CM Punk for him to leave. And unfortunately, by that point, he already has a body beat to shit and worn down and broken down. And as you can clearly see, he's still not completely healthy because he's having to go through another back surgery. And if this guy is really dedicating this as his new life, how long does he have as a UFC fighter? If he flops in his first fight, that's going to really kind of determine his path from now on, unless he proves otherwise. And wrongfully or rightfully, this first fight's going to really determine to not only the UFC fan base, but also the UFC officials. Dana Brooke, all those people. Is this guy really going to make it? It's a lot of questions you got to ask, bring in a guy like CM Punk, because while at the same time he is a draw as far as money goes, as far as a health standard, can this guy really go that long? He's dedicating this as like he was in wrestling, and I can't see him at all having anywhere as long as run with UFC as he did with WWE, just for the sole fact that the amount of beatings and the amount of stress and the amount of injuries he's had already, give and take what he will go through in UFC, it could be very bad for CM Punk, because this is not a guy who stayed relatively healthy throughout his entire wrestling run. He's had a lot of surgeries, a lot of injuries. He's admitted that he's had a ton of concussions, which is a very controversial subject. The guy is really broken down and beat down, and, how he will fare in UFC, if I had to make a prediction, I don't think he fares that good. He may do good at the beginning, but, when you are looking at a guy who's had a ton of injuries, he's come from what's argued to be a sport. He's come from basically, I think, around a clean 15 to 20 years of wrestling, and having 20 to 15 to, I think, around 15 to 20 years of wrestling, and having a body beat to shit from wrestling, trying to go into UFC is really not smart. Batista tried to do the same thing, but his trainer advised him not to. After what he's already been through and his age, it's not a good idea. And, it's kind of the same thing when you look at CM Punk, because CM Punk is a guy who, he may not be young, but he is, he's not young as in UFC young. He's not what I think fit for a UFC fighter. Not because I don't think he could have ever done it. I think at one point, had CM Punk went early on, over choosing WWE, I would have said, you know what, he's young, he's relatively healthy, he could make a career at it, but he jumped ship too late, in my opinion, and I don't think he's going to have much of a career in the UFC, and if this flops, he's going to be a laughingstock in UFC, and, what does he have then? It's not like if he flops in UFC, he's going to be broke or anything, because he's made a shit ton of money in WWE. He won that lawsuit against WWE, and he got all of his royalties and then some. So the guy will be fine. But he is 37. I doubt he has enough to live on for the rest of his life. And I don't know what his wife AJ Lee is doing since she's quit wrestling, but I know she's gathered quite a lot of money from WWE as well. So, if all else fails, he can at least rely on the money he's gotten from WWE. But, how long can that last you when you're 37 years old? And, even though CM Punk doesn't live a very expensive lifestyle, I think he is quite frugal with his money. It's kind of hard to juggle whatever he has until you're 50 or something. Given all your expenses and stuff. But, that's my opinion, No one will really know what will happen. We're just going to have to see what goes from here on out. But to me, honestly, if I had to make a prediction, I see CM Punk not having a very good UFC run, and I predict him possibly having to give up UFC before he even could get started, because he's just not, his body is not in the state of mind that his mind is. You know, his body and mind are in two different places. His body is a wore down, tired, exhausted body that has a shit ton of previous injuries and surgeries, but his mind is dedicated to wanting to be a fighter just like he was as a wrestler, but it's not working. And will it work? I don't think so, but, you know, we'll have to see. So that is my opinion on Phillip Brooks's UFC condition or state and his surgery. And if you liked what I said and my opinions, as always, like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you later. Bye-bye.